In my restless dreams, I see that town, Silent Hill. You promised you'd take me there again someday, but you never did. Well, I'm alone there now, in our special place, waiting for you.
That dialogue is an excerpt from Mary's letter, an important item received at the very beginning of Silent Hill 2. It's worth noting that Monica Taylor-Horgan, the actress that played Mary, cried after narrating that letter. I mean, I cried like a baby after she read the letter myself. It's powerful, poignant, and can affect the outcome of the game depending on what you do with it. My name is Nick, this is Deep Dives, and welcome to the world of Silent Hill 2.
Maria?
You said you took everything, but you forgot that videotape we made. I wonder if it's still there.
How do you know about that? Aren't you Maria?
Welcome to the first in a series of videos where I'll be taking an extended look right inside the bowels of various video games, talking about facts, figures, some of the more obscure stuff behind the scenes, and anything I think might be interesting. For Silent Hill 2 in particular, I have to warn you that during this video we will be exploring some difficult subjects, especially in regards to the different characters James meets on his journey through Silent Hill and how each of their own traumas are explored. Now, I could talk about Silent Hill 2 for days, but we don't have days, so I'll be going into as much detail as I can for each segment. With that in mind, let's venture into Silent Hill. Silent Hill 2 is not a direct sequel to the first game. It does, however, take place in the same town. You take on the role of James Sunderland, who decided to take a stroll into Silent Hill after receiving a letter from his dead wife, saying she was waiting there for him. Along the way, you meet a variety of interesting characters, including Maria, who bears an eerie resemblance to James's late wife. That not ring any alarm bells for you, James? No? Okay, moving on. James clearly didn't get the memo, but the town of Silent Hill tends to mould itself based on the visitors it receives, like some evil demonic entity that wants to torture people for the mistakes they may or may not have made, but more on that later. Throughout his journey through Silent Hill, James meets a bunch of interesting characters while trying to dodge the dangerous denizens that Silent Hill seems intent on throwing his way. As he makes his way towards the end, James discovers, spoiler alert, that his wife is indeed dead and he actually offed her. Bastard! The town had summoned him there with a view for him to atone for his sins and come to the realisation of what he had done. There is of course more to this, explained by the complex layers of each character, monster and location throughout the game. Firstly, let's get a little background perspective on the town of Silent Hill itself. Silent Hill has been around for some time, 4 centuries in fact. Native Americans settled there first, attracted to the area because of its supernatural energies and other strange occurrences. It was seen as a holy place to them. They settled here for some time before colonists arrived and slaughtered them all, turning the place into a burial ground. This mass occurrence of death would be followed by more death in the form of a plague that would take the colonists, further adding to the power that Silent Hill contained, twisting it slowly into something else. Another epidemic or two later, and a couple of centuries, Silent Hill's power had distortedly grown to great proportions. A terrible cult sprang up called the Order, whose prime goal was to bring about the end of the world and then get all their followers to paradise. One of their most heinous acts was by Dahlia Gillespie, who believed that if she set her child on fire, she could summon her god into this world. It was that event that triggered Silent Hill's full-blown powers, and began calling to people with darkness in their hearts. Letter from dead wife. It's not real! For people that are brought to Silent Hill, well, firstly, you're trapped until your baggage is resolved, so get over it. Secondly, it takes the form of 3 flavours. Number 1, the real world. Everything is normal and fine, people are still roaming around like there's nothing wrong. Can't you see all the monsters? Number 2. The fog world. Almost like a dreamlike state, the fog world is as it sounds, coated in a thick layer of fog. If you are here, then I have some bad news for you. You are trapped. Roads out of Silent Hill will be blocked, monsters will roam free, and the town will be seemingly deserted. Originally designed to help with graphical limitations, there have been many interpretations as to why the fog exists in-game. The fog is different for each person. In the case of James Sunderland, it's a fog of the mind, and when he transitions to the other world, the fog clears and things get scary as he faces the truth. Number 3. The other world. Bloody hell, get out of there. The other world is terrible. Once that fog has been peeled back, you are left with the harshest of truths. You are in a living hell. A hell created by your own psyche, making it different for everyone. It's worth noting here that the other world is where the Order believes their god resides. Funny that. We will explore each character's version of the other world later, but for now all you need to know is that it's generally a dark, hellish place, usually made up of rusted and blood-stained surroundings, barbed-wired fence walls, and fleshy viscera, which all in all make for not a very nice place to be in. Now, onto the characters. You can see why James Sunderland was called to Silent Hill. He did a terrible thing. He killed his wife, and Silent Hill has called to him as it has also called to others. One of the first characters you meet is Angela Orosco, a 19-year-old runaway who has come to Silent Hill in search of a missing mother. Of course, she is not there. Silent Hill has summoned Angela to the town to deal with her inner darkness. James initially encounters Angela Orosco, played by Donna Burke in the original cut, in a graveyard on the way into town, and she explains that she's come to Silent Hill to find her mother who has gone missing.
I'm looking for my mama. I mean my mother. It's been so long since I've seen her.
Angela is a very shy character who tends to stumble over her words quite frequently during their initial encounter. This, accompanied by her introverted nature, sadly leads to the crux of her story, one of sexual abuse and mental health issues. When they meet again later at the Blue Creek Apartments, the first signs of her horrific past begin to manifest as we see Angela lying on the floor of room 109, staring at a knife while contemplating suicide, having seemingly lost all hope.
I don't know what you're planning, but there's always another way.
The first signs of Angela's depression become apparent here, with her tone shifting and mentioning that both her and James deserve whatever is happening to them. It is said that people with depression are more likely to experience bouts of fatigue, and the way Angela is speaking during this scene is another big indicator. Sadly, many would dismiss that behaviour as her just being out of it. After talking Angela down, he reminds her that he came to Silent Hill to look for Mary. This time, however, he mentions that Mary is dead, and Angela becomes more uncomfortable than she already was.
She's dead? I've got to find my mama.
Should I go with you? This town's dangerous. Now I know what you meant back there in the cemetery.
I'll be okay by myself. Besides, I'd just slow you down.
Her distrust of James visibly grows during this moment, building on her previous uncertainty, most likely due to his gender. Her distrust of James also serves as some foreshadowing for later in the game as we discover the fate of Mary. Finally, James asks Angela about the knife, who offers it to James, knowing she might do something bad with it. As James goes to take it, however, Angela has an adverse reaction to his advance. This would seem to be a mixture of her past and also her slight distrust of James coming into play here as we slowly build an overall picture of what happened to her. Another piece of key information is discovered about Angela during the labyrinth in the form of a bloody newspaper article telling of the murder of Thomas Orosco, a lumberjack found dead with multiple stab wounds to the neck. Shortly after, Angela's voice is heard screaming,
Daddy, please don't!
from another room in one of the darkest scenes in the game. When you rush to Angela's aid, James discovered she is being attacked by a monster which can only be described as two entangled bodies lying on the frame of a bed covered in rotting skin. It would seem the bodies have been fused together and are having sexual intercourse. It's a terrifying sight, and all Angela can do is sit in the corner, traumatised. In this moment, we are in Angela's version of the other world. It's extremely on the nose, but the room, depicting Angela's own personal hell, is flesh-covered walls with pistons thrusting in and out of the holes in the wall, mimicking sex. The creature is Angela's father, or at least that's how her mind manifests him. All James can see is the horrendous monstrosity before him. This whole room and boss fight is meant to represent Angela's rape at the hands of her father, and is very uncomfortable to see him play through. The novelisation further expands on this, saying that the brother was involved also in her abuse. It's easy to see why Angela attacks the monster after James defeats it. Years of pent-up anger is easily unleashed. Angela, however, is not violent by nature and immediately starts to sob and retch afterward with overwhelming mixed emotions. James tries to console her, but Angela screams and tells him to stay away. She then verbally attacks James, questioning him on what happened with his wife.
You said your wife Mary was dead, right?
Yes. She was ill.
Liar! I know about you. You didn't want her around anymore. You probably found someone else.
He implies that she died from her illness, but Angela can see right through him, calling him a liar. It's as if that the death of the monster brings her some relief and closure to the trauma, lifting the veil ever so slightly, but not completely, just enough that she is able to call James out on his lie. Despite the atrocities her father committed, it's clear that Angela still feels very guilty over killing him. It's something she can never seemingly escape from, and is evident in her final encounter with James. At the Lakeview Hotel, James once again finds Angela, this time on a burning staircase. Here, Angela is seen standing between two skinned, blood-stained bodies representing her father and brother. Remember, everyone's Silent Hill otherworld is different, and James has entered Angela's once again.
Mama, why are you running away? You're not my mama.
In her delirious state, she sees James as her mother initially before realising her mistake. She tells James that she shouldn't have been saved and deserves everything that's happened to her. Something which is unfortunately very common in people with depression and PTSD.
Thank you for saving me. But I wish you hadn't. Even Mama said it. I deserved what happened.
No, Angela, that's wrong.
She softens and asks James if he will look after her, but James, full of his own sin and burdens, is unable to respond in kind and looks dejectedly at the floor in shame. This is enough to drive Angela over the edge. She asks for a knife back, and when James refuses, walks up the burning staircase into the heat of the fire. James comments that,
It's hot as hell in here.
You see it too. For me, it's always like this.
in all their previous encounters, James has never seen the fire that surrounds her. But now he's witnessed her trauma, he realises that it's always been there for her. It's a popular theory that the fire represents Angela's guilt from killing her father. Another is that her life is a living hell. This has never been confirmed and is left down to player interpretation. Angela's tale is a heartbreaking one and will sadly be relatable to many. More of her backstory is fleshed out in the novelisation, but the key thing here is that Angela never spoke to anybody about her abuse. Keeping these feelings within her ultimately drove her to kill her father, and although her circumstances were different to James, their trauma called both of them to Silent Hill in the first place. On James's journey through the apartment section of the game, he encounters two characters, one of which is Eddie Dombrowski. Like Angela, Eddie has been summoned to Silent Hill for reasons initially unknown. During their first encounter, James finds Eddie vomiting in a toilet in one of the rooms. This is shortly after James discovers a corpse stuffed in a fridge, causing Eddie to profusely claim his innocence.
It wasn't me. I didn't do it.
Do what?
I didn't do anything. I swear. He was like this when I got here.
You would be forgiven for missing subtle details here, but why would Eddie jump straight to the defensive? Something is not right here. It's also worth noting that he is throwing up most likely because he had just previously seen the corpse. Could it be that he had been accused of killing before? We'll find out more shortly. The next time you find Eddie, he is sat, calmly eating pizza at Pete's Bowl-O-Rama, having a conversation with another new character, Laura. But more on her later.
Huh, you're just a gutless fatso.
What'd you have to say that for?
During their brief exchange, Laura calls Eddie a gutless fatso, yet he doesn't really try to defend himself. She runs away at the sight of James, and when Eddie is questioned by James as to why he won't go after her, he sadly echoes Laura's words.
Said a fatso like me would just slow her down.
Another telling scene in which, despite the fact there are monsters roaming around town, Eddie is quite happy to sit eating pizza, as if it was comforting him. His willingness to accept the insults shows Eddie may be used to those unkind words and has lived with it for a long time. The next time James runs into Eddie is in Toluca Prison's cafeteria. Eddie's tone has changed, becoming something slightly more disturbed and sinister.
Killing a person ain't no big deal. Just put the gun to their head. Pow.
It would seem that the longer Eddie is in Silent Hill, the more his layers get peeled back, revealing more about the real reason he is there. In this scene, another body is present, and Eddie initially is happy to take responsibility for the unknown man's death, claiming he was making fun of him. After some pushback from James, Eddie very quickly goes back on what he said, saying that the body was already there. It's strange behaviour, almost as if Eddie feels he has something to prove, trying to make himself seem dangerous. When it doesn't work on James, however, Eddie quickly goes back to his previous demeanour.
Eddie? What are you doing?
What does it look like? He always busted my balls. You fat, disgusting piece of shit. You make me sick. Fat ass, you're nothing but a waste of skin. You're so ugly, even your mama don't love you. Well, maybe he was right. Maybe I am nothing but a fat, disgusting piece of shit.
The seams, however, are slowly unravelling. During their final encounter, James steps into Eddie's other world. Eddie's cold detachment from reality manifests itself as a meat locker with bodies hanging from the ceiling. It's at this point that Eddie has finally lost it, and there's no getting through to him. A life of torment at the hands of others has sent Eddie over the edge, to the point where the only way to stop them in his mind is to kill them. He reveals killing the bully's dog and how much he enjoyed it, before also revealing he shot the bully too. It's interesting to note that according to Masahiro Ito, Eddie only ever killed a dog. The bodies that appear in these scenes are just illusions. It seems to be for this reason that Eddie denies the fact that he was responsible for the corpses. He's actually telling the truth. So why would he lie? It's not a stretch to surmise that prolonged bullying can make someone take on a different persona. The reality, however, is that Eddie was always afraid and downtrodden. The constant abuse he suffered at the hands of his tormentors caused him to hate himself, and eventually developing coping mechanisms to deal with his suffering. As a result, Eddie's attitude towards himself is consistent with someone suffering with symptoms of body dysmorphic disorder. More subtle evidence of this is hinted at even before you meet Eddie for the first time. Across from the room where James first meets Eddie is a room full of football posters. One even has "physical beauty" written on it, a probable reference to themes of body image and body dysmorphia Eddie has developed. The football posters in this room clearly point towards the player that Eddie shot in the knee shortly before killing his dog. During the last scene, everything James says in Eddie's mind is just an insult, despite the fact that James is being kind of reasonable. The two fight in what marks the first non-possessed human enemy of the series. James is forced to kill Eddie, ending his sad tale. Eddie was brought to Silent Hill to confront the growing demons within. The madness of the town, however, ultimately consumed him. We brought her up earlier, but now it's time to talk about Silent Hill 2's most annoying character, Laura, who is an absolute ratbag. James first encounters Laura in the Woodside apartments, setting a nice precedent for what kind of a dick she is. While James is reaching for a key through some nicely placed bars, Laura thinks it's funny to knock the key out of the way and stomp on James's hand. What a little cow. Not long after leaving the apartments, Laura is found innocently humming to herself on a wall, goading James about the hand stomping incident. She then reveals something that makes her character worth the annoyance.
What's that letter?
None of your business. You didn't love Mary anyway.
Wait! How do you know Mary's name?
Before James can question her further, Laura runs away, which becomes something of a regular occurrence. She is later seen, as we mentioned before, talking to Eddie at Bowlerama. A piece of dialogue here reveals that she actually runs away a
If
lot.
you did something bad, why don't you just say you're sorry? Well, I guess I run away a lot too.
When she sees James again, guess what she does? Runs away! Laura gives off the impression that she doesn't like James too much, but still gives us no clue as to why. This is made even more apparent when later on she locks James in one of the hospital rooms full of monsters. Thanks, Laura, you dick! During the final portion of Silent Hill 2, it's finally confirmed that Laura did indeed know Mary. Laura gives James a letter that reads, "My dearest Laura, I'm leaving this letter to Rachel to give to you after I'm gone. I'm far away now, in a quiet, beautiful place. Please forgive me for not saying goodbye before I left. Be well, Laura. Don't be too hard on the sisters. And Laura, about James. I know you hate him because you think he isn't nice to me, but please give him a chance. It's true he may be a little surly sometimes and he doesn't laugh much, but underneath he's really a sweet person. Laura, I love you like my very own daughter. If things had worked out differently, I was hoping to adopt you. Happy 8th birthday, Laura." After he has finished reading the letter, he asks Laura this crucial question.
Laura, how old are you?
I turned 8 last week.
So, Mary couldn't have died 3 years ago.
Earlier, James was adamant that Mary had died 3 years ago. Clearly, this wasn't the case. James's trauma over what he did to Mary had fractured his mind, covering up this fact. It's revealed shortly after what he did to Mary, and Laura does not take it too well. Confirming what was said in the letter, Laura lambasts James, saying he didn't care for Mary, before quietly leaving the room. In most cases, this is the last time you'll see Laura. She is only in one of the game's endings, which will be discussed in more detail later. Otherwise, it's assumed that Laura leaves the town unharmed. She was never there because she was called. She was genuinely a friend to Mary and was there for her near the end. Because she was innocent in all of this, Silent Hill seemed like just a quiet town to her. No danger at all. Instead, she was there looking for her friend, only to be horrifically disappointed in the end. I still don't feel sorry for her. Dick. Now, let's talk about those pesky creatures that roam the streets of Silent Hill. What I'll be doing is looking at the enemy types and briefly describing why they are there. Everything is there for a reason, meticulously planned from the start. As we discussed before, Silent Hill shapes itself based on the person, bringing to light their innermost thoughts, fears and desires. James has many demons, plenty of food for Silent Hill to feed on. Let's look at the first creature you discover in the game, the Lying Figure. These creatures appear to be encased in a straitjacket made of flesh. Pretty grim. They scurry across the ground, making horrible high-pitched wailing noises, and seem to love hiding under cars. The lying figure is meant to represent the image of a hospital patient squirming in agony, and is a physical manifestation of James's internal suffering. The novelisation also mentions they were created from feelings of confinement, which makes sense considering the straitjacket they wear. Masahiro Ito stated that he designed the lying figure as reminiscence of Mary in her state of terminal illness. This adds another layer to the lying figure, also making it a manifestation of how Mary envisaged herself, trapped in her own body with no hope or chance for escape. The lying figure's main form of attack is to spit acid like mist. Many have theorised that this is a representation of the harsh words Mary would say to James, as in to spew venom. Tied all together, you have a very real representation of James's internal suffering. He felt very restricted during Mary's final days, unable to touch her, hold her, or be with her sexually. The very fact that she seemingly resented James for all of this just made it worse, and is subtly manifested in the form of the lying figures. Next up, we have the bubblehead nurses. These suggestively dressed monstrosities are a combination of two things. Firstly, the anxiety James felt as he watched his wife dying slowly in hospital, surrounded by seemingly incompetent doctors and nurses. Secondly, and more obviously, they represent the very high levels of sexual frustration James was feeling during this time. I mean, Christ, they even die with their legs spread wide open. Their heads being covered in bubble is a direct reference to the suffocation Mary endured at the hands of James when he smothered her with a pillow. Another constant reminder of what he did. It's noted that their heads convulse with vigour as if they were trying to break free from their constraints. Closely tying in with the sexual themes is another common enemy you'll find in the game, the mannequin. Mannequins are two female torsos fused together, the bottom used for walking while the footless top pair of legs are used for striking. Like the nurses, these also represent sexual frustration, James's natural urges embodied. The first time you encounter these creatures, two of them are being abused by Pyramid Head, but more on him later. This leads many to believe the scene is representative of James acting as an oppressor over his wife Mary during their final moments together, something which is alluded to when you discover the tablet of the oppressor later in the game. Now for the brilliantly named Flesh Lips. These bloated sacks of messy flesh hang from a ceiling and try their best to strangle James. Thankfully, they only appear in one section of the game because they are bloody horrible. According to developer Masahiro Ito, the metal frames they sit in are meant to represent a bed, and the aforementioned flesh lips are meant to be a reflection of Mary's actual mouth, which abused James during their final days together. These are the creatures that Laura locks you in with. Dick. The Mandarin, not to be confused with Iron Man's mortal enemy, is another monster that gets little airtime during Silent Hill 2. They do, however, represent a large portion of how James is feeling. According to the Book of Lost Memories, they symbolise the feeling of overwhelming, incomprehensible anguish and helplessness. This is the reason they are not allowed to stand above ground. The novelisation also mentions they originated from a desire to escape. As discussed before, James felt trapped, isolated and alone, unable to help or be with Mary. In the end, this would cause him to take some drastic action, an action so terrible it would break him, sending him into a spiral of guilt, pain and suffering. Before going any further, due to the heavy nature of the themes in this game, we're going to take a break to talk about some light Silent Hill 2 facts before going on to talk about Maria, Pyramid Head, James and Mary. Silent Hill 2 released in the UK in November 2001, 2 months after the lucky people in the States got the game on their glorious PS2s. Shortly after, an extended version, which I also owned, was released on Microsoft's brand new at the time Xbox. The only difference here was the inclusion of the Born from a Wish scenario, which we will get onto later. Once again, Stateside got it on the 20th of December 2001, whereas we poor Europeans had to wait almost a year, releasing in the UK on the 14th of October 2002. Finally, after many years of fans crying to the Konami gods, they released a package remastering both Silent Hill 2 and 3 as part of a HD collection in 2012. It was extremely buggy, but never mind, we could play it once more. The game is all about drawing the player in, even going so far as to remove the HUD. It's left down to you, the player, to check things like health, gun ammo and locations in the pause game menu. For me, this was perfect. You want to be drawn into the horror, and there was no better way than isolating the player within their experience. Control-wise, you can choose between classic horror staple tank controls, or you can opt for a more modern approach giving you freedom of movement. Either way, the controls still have a stiff feel to them, adding to that level of discomfort, often leaving you in a panic, which in this game is a good thing. A nice little design feature incorporates the joypad rumble. When your health gets low, it will vibrate, mirroring James's beating heart. Early game, you are encouraged to use melee weapons, but later you can pick up guns. as in any horror game, ammo is scarce regardless of difficulty, to further panic the player. Cool fact alert, you can actually parry. Well, kind of. It's a block that actually requires some timing. By pressing the run button just before an enemy strikes, you can actually block attacks with melee weapons. You must be out of lock-on mode to do this, however. Early game, you get two very important items which will see you through. The first is the flashlight. Very important, as most of the game is bloody dark. If you turn the light off, it is of course very difficult to get around, but the monsters will find it difficult to see you as well. The second item is the radio, which generates static depending on if there are monsters around. It's another fantastic little feature and is bloody excellent for creating some room entry terror. There is always something around the corner. You can't see it, but the static is there, confirming its presence. The very fact that you can only look at the map if there is a light source is another excellent feature, and believe it or not many players know this, as no one ever turns the light off. Another cool feature is the map actually updates itself. Locked doors and destroyed pathways will be scribbled onto the map seemingly in red biro as you progress through the game. This little feature just adds to the layers of techniques used to make it seem less and less like a video game and more like you are seeing through James's eyes. We've mentioned the novelisation a lot so far, so it would be remiss of me not to talk about it. The book was written by Sadamu Yamashita and was an officially licensed Konami product. It is unknown if Hideyuki Owaku, the writer of the first 4 Silent Hill games, was directly involved with contributing to the novel, but the novel does not contradict anything from the game and is a faithful novelisation. Okay, strap yourselves in, because we're about to take an extended look at our main players. Man, oh man, Pyramid Head. You scary bastard. Nothing is more terrifying than hearing that knife scrape along the floor, yet you cannot see a thing. You know he's coming though. He is chasing you and he will not stop. I genuinely think he is one of gaming's greatest villains. You cannot see his face, and he shows no quarter as he chases James through the various locations of Silent Hill. Pyramid Head is a pure manifestation of James's guilt, intent on punishing him for what he had done to Mary. James has a deep desire to see himself punished for what he has done, and Silent Hill knows this. That's why it makes sense that these feelings are represented in the worst enemy the game has to offer. Those feelings, aka Pyramid Head, chase James throughout his journey, tormenting him. On the flip side of this, you have Maria, who is trying to serve as a distraction from why he is there, but more on that later. So, good old Pyramid Head does his job and tries to remind James why he was summoned in the first place, by killing Maria over and over. In doing this, James is forced to experience that guilt and suffering all over again. After the third time of seeing Maria killed, James finally accepts what he has done. With James now fighting back, the Pyramid Heads are no longer necessary, so they decide to impale themselves, their purposes fulfilled. A tweet from Ito once stated, "PH is the guardian to keep James being only human, produced by his guilt, the main reason why PH attacks other creatures on his delusion." In short, Pyramid Head is the truth, and Maria is the deception, two parts of James's psyche pulling him in different directions. Pyramid Head wants James to push forward to uncover the truth and face up to what he had done, so he can ultimately move on as per Mary's wish. Otherwise, why would he grant him access to new areas at key points in the game? He is first seen draining the water in the apartment stairwell, and later he pushes James off Brookhaven rooftop into the special treatment area to continue his journey. As with most of the other creatures found in Silent Hill, themes of sexuality are also found with Pyramid Head. I mean, the first time you see him, he's doing that horrible thing with the mannequins. Before you engage in the first boss fight, you discover Pyramid Head having his way with one of the lying figures. And also, if you've seen Fukuro, a Silent Hill 2 short, Pyramid Head's perverseness is explored even further. It's a really weird short, and I recommend only watching it the once. Before you start wondering how Pyramid Head's appearances is connected in other games, don't. Ito only ever intended Pyramid Head to be for James. His presence in subsequent games and movies was purely for financial benefit, as he had clearly served his scary purpose well.
Mary? No, you're not.
Do I look like your girlfriend?
No, my late wife. I can't believe it. You could be her twin. Your face, your voice, just your hair and clothes are different.
My name is Maria. I don't look like a ghost, do I?
So, what is Maria? We know she's not real,
See? I'm real.
despite her saying she is. The tale of Maria can be a little confusing, but thankfully a bonus mini-story called Born from a Wish was released, the title there being quite telling. As mentioned many times before, Silent Hill summoned James for a reason. One way or another, he needs to deal with his baggage. Where Pyramid Head wants to push James to the truth, Maria, born from James's perfect image of what he wishes his wife was, is there to tempt him to the dark side. This basically makes Maria another one of Silent Hill's monster creations, but she's not like the rest, she's actually self-aware. When she wakes up, she initially has no memory as to why she is there in the first place. Venturing out of town, alone and frightened, Maria eventually stumbles across a large mansion home to one Ernest Baldwin. Ernest has locked himself in a room and asked Maria to go and retrieve a vial of white liquid for him, so he can revive his daughter. It's noted that during this scene, Ernest seems to pick up on what Maria actually is, expressing, "That why you can see me?" after she slides his daughter's letter through the door. The most popular theory going round is that Ernest is a ghost, given strength by the fact that Maria never actually sees Ernest in person, and he states that he is unable to leave the mansion. Written on the outside of the mansion is, "Keep out of haunted mansion." Big clue there. When Maria returns with the goods, Ernest tells Maria of a man called James Sunderland, and that he is not very nice. This gets Maria's cogs turning as she remembers details about James, including the fact that he murdered his wife. She also remembers that underneath it all, James is a kind man. After this, she's finally able to access the room that Ernest was in, only to discover it's empty, aside from some gloves and a birthday card to Ernest. Maria leaves and for a moment considers suicide. Instead, she chucks the gun over the wall and succumbs to her actual nature, which is to find James and be everything he wants. We then pick up Maria's story in Rosewater Park. Maria already seems to have worked herself out and is now presenting herself as a confident and sassy lady. James is clearly freaked out by her confidence and also seeing a version of his wife he always wanted. Maria has all of Mary's memories. She knows everything from the beginning, which essentially makes her the main antagonist of the game, clinging ever so closely to James and showing extreme jealousy in certain moments.
Anyway, I'm glad you're alive.
Anyway? What do you mean, anyway? You don't sound very happy to see me. I was almost killed back there. Why didn't you try to save me? All you care about is that dead wife of yours. I've never been so scared in my whole life. You couldn't care less about me, could you?
No, I
Then
just...
stay with me. Don't ever leave me alone. You're supposed to take care of me.
It's shortly after this that Maria is killed for the first time by Pyramid Head, and James is left in the elevator, devastated by what had just happened. A woman who is like Mary, dead in front of him. Remind you of anything, James? Anyway, James would later find Maria locked up alive and well in the labyrinth, but this time her behaviour has shifted.
James, honey, did something happen to you? After we got separated in that long hallway? Are you confusing me with someone else? You were always so forgetful. Remember that time in the hotel?
Maria?
James is confused by this, but Maria knows what she is doing, luring James once again to the dark side with promises of the sexual gratification he sorely desires. Thankfully, Pyramid Head, once again playing defense, scores a touchdown and takes care of Maria. I mean, it's actually unknown who offs her, but most people's bets are on the triangle-headed bad boy. In Maria's final normal scene, she is once again killed in front of James as a final reminder that she isn't real and James really needs to face up to what he has done. As for Maria's fate, well, we'll look at that in the endings. For now, it's safe to say that Maria is the simplest creature of all to understand. Like Pyramid Head, Maria was there to serve a purpose. She may have been born from James's subconscious like the rest of the creatures, but she was actually self-aware and may have even loved James deep down. In an interesting piece of trivia, Maria is actually the Latin form of Mary. Who knew? Oh, and they are also voiced by the same voice actor, obviously. Finally, on to James and Mary. A lot about these has been covered already, so I guess this serves as a brief overview of the pairing and how they got to Silent Hill 2. As per the Silent Hill 2 novelisation, James met Mary at one of their mutual friends' house parties. Their meeting sparked a fiery romance that eventually developed into a strong relationship, full of love and admiration. They vacationed to Silent Hill, staying in the same Lakeview hotel featured at the end of the game in room 312, the very same room where James's big revelation would occur. Not long after their vacation, Mary would fall ill with an incurable terminal disease. She was given 3 years to live. The disease made Mary's hair fall out and her skin tone changed, making her feel like her beauty was withering. The doctors consistently advised there was nothing to be done. Mary would have to live out her remaining days in hospital.
It'd be easier if they'd just kill me. But I guess the hospital is making a nice profit off me. They want to keep me alive.
Are you still here? I told you to go! Are you deaf? Don't come back! James! Wait! Please don't go! Stay with me! Don't leave me alone! I didn't mean what I said!
Mary lashed out at everyone she loved. Most of it was directed at James, and as a result, over time, James would visit Mary less frequently. The tensions and the arguments were too much, forcing James to take up drinking, letting his demons slowly take hold. Mary was able to find some comfort, however, in another patient, the previously mentioned Laura. Laura's hostility towards James makes sense, given the amount of time her and Mary spent together. There were many occasions where James was supposed to visit, but never came. As it turns out, Mary was also willing to adopt Laura had things turned out differently. Sadly, that never came to pass. During her last days, Mary wrote letters to both James and Laura, giving them to her nurse Rachel and asking her to pass them on after her death. She would then return home and James would become her carer, but only for a short while. It was here that James committed an unspeakable act, smothering Mary with a pillow, ending her life. It's hinted at in the Book of Lost Memories and confirmed in the novelisation that James actually brings Mary's body to Silent Hill and that she is in the backseat of his car when he arrives. Another tweet from Ito would explain. He hasn't noticed he killed her too. It would seem that James had repressed the memory of killing Mary. When you think of it this way, it makes sense that the letter James received from Mary was never real in the first place. It was just another delusion created by James to protect him from the truth. The truth that she didn't die 3 years ago. She was in fact alive just a few days ago, until he decided to take Mary's fate into his own hands and murder her. It would be this act that sent him over the edge, making him perfect food for Silent Hill. James was originally meant to have 2 distinct personalities. A creator's comment in the Lost Memories Silent Hill Chronicle would tell us that, in the initial stages of the scenario, he was a character who had 2 personalities, Joseph and James. The name Joseph was borrowed from the name of a man suspected of being Jack the Ripper, and James is a derivative. This of course didn't make it into the final game, but subtle shades of James can be seen throughout. Most of the time, James is seen as and even described as a kind, caring, courteous individual. Try where he might, he often falls short of successfully consoling people, backing off when challenged and losing any confidence he might have had. To top this off, it's heavily implied that James is suicidal despite the fact that he denies it. It was actually the reason he came to Silent Hill in the first place, and in one of the endings, goes through with it. In the novelisation, James says, "Actually, I guess I'm dead. Heart's as good as dead anyway." No one in their correct state of mind would do half the things James does during his journey. Things like leaving his car door open, leaving his flashlight on while hiding from Pyramid Head, sticking his hand inside a hole in the wall after being pricked by something inside, dipping his hands inside a filthy toilet to retrieve a wallet and not washing his hands afterwards, and asking a visibly armed Eddie if he has gone nuts. Oh, and also jumping down bloody holes! Lots of them! If the player walks up to Angela again in the cemetery, she will ask, "Aren't you looking for someone?" And the forgetful James will reply, "That's right," and walk off. The signs are there from the beginning.
This town, there's something wrong with it. It's kind of hard to explain, but...
Is it dangerous?
Maybe. And it's not just the fog, either.
Okay, I got it. I'll be careful.
I'm not lying.
No, I believe you. It's just... I guess I really don't care if it's dangerous or not. I'm going to town either way. I don't know why I think she's here.
She's dead?
Don't worry. I'm not crazy. At least, I don't think so.
When you break it down to basics, James and Mary were happy and in love until illness came and changed everything. Over the course of 3 years, things would get worse for the couple. Arguing would intensify, their dreams of children would collapse, James would begin drinking more, still remaining faithful to Mary despite his sexual frustration. Slowly but surely, James would begin to resent Mary, but at the same time, seeing her in so much pain would kill him inside. Unable to take it anymore, James would eventually commit the ultimate sin. This drove him over the edge, and with Silent Hill mysteriously calling to him, he went to end it, unable to live with himself. He put Mary on the back seat of his car and drove. The half a day's drive it took to get to Silent Hill was long enough for the repression to set in. This was most likely caused by PTSD. Couple that with the power of Silent Hill, and by the time James arrives, his delusions have taken over. He believes Mary has been dead for 3 years, taken by her illness, although it was 3 years ago she became ill. He thinks he's received a letter from Mary, when in fact it was Silent Hill that sent the letter, and from this point on, James is on a path to redemption. Kinda. Or ruin, depending on how you look at it. What happens, of course, is in the hands of the players. How you play through the game will determine the ending you experience. There is a grand total of 6 endings in Silent Hill 2, 4 serious endings and 2 joke endings, 3 of which you are limited to on your first playthrough, with the other 3 only obtainable in replays. The first ending, and some would probably consider the best, is the Leave ending. In this ending, James rejects Maria and after killing her, gets a final meeting with Mary where she gives him the real letter. After that, James finds Laura and leaves with her, possibly fulfilling Mary's wish to adopt Laura as his own. In order to get this ending, as you go through the game, make sure to regularly check Mary's photo and letter, keep your health high, try to stay as far away from Maria as possible, and in the Lakeview Hotel, listen to the conversation on the headphones and in the hallway. An interesting fact you might not know about Mary's letter is that if you check it after the fight with Eddie, it will be blank. And if you try and find it in your inventory after viewing the videotape, it will be gone completely, further giving weight to the letter not being real. The second ending on the list is In Water. As with the previous ending, James fights Maria to the death before seeing Mary one last time. Coming to the conclusion that he is unable to live without Mary, James gets in his car and plows it straight into Toluca Lake, killing himself so he can be with Mary once more.
Now I understand the real reason I came to this town. I wonder, what was I afraid of? Without you, Mary, I've got nothing. Now we can be together.
This ending is achieved by keeping James's health low and not healing immediately when taking damage, checking Angela's knife, reading the patient's diary on Brookhaven Roof and the second letter to James in Neely's bar, and once again listening to both conversations in the Lakeview Hotel. In the third standard ending, James confronts an angry Mary in the final boss room, and I'd say she's pretty pissed off with what he had done to her. After James dispatches the evil manifestation, he heads back to Rosewater Park. Moments later, Maria would once again appear, resurrected, and ask if James had killed Mary again. James tells her it wasn't Mary, implying that he has finally seen through Silent Hill's illusions. James then leaves with Maria. As they walk, however, Maria starts coughing, implying she is suffering from the same illness as Mary, and the cycle is doomed to repeat itself. In order to live unhappily ever after with Maria, you need to keep your health high and heal frequently if James is injured, spend a lot of time with Maria and protect her from monsters, follow her commands, and visit her when she is sick in Brookhaven Hospital. When Maria dies in the labyrinth, attempt to re-enter the room, and finally, in the Lakeview Hotel, do not listen to any of the conversations. On a second playthrough, if you complete the game with 4 special items in your inventory, you will be treated to the Rebirth ending. You need to find the White Chrism in Blue Creek, the Lost Memories in Texan Gas, the Obsidian Goblet in the Historical Society, and the Crimson Ceremony in the Reading Room of Lakeview Hotel. Once you have these, kill Maria as normal, and a scene will play out where James takes Mary's corpse, sail to the Church of Rebirth on Toluca Lake Island, and try to resurrect Mary with unknown results. A fiver says she goes Pet Cemetery on his ass. In a small doghouse near Jack's Inn, you can find a dog key. Carry this all the way to Lakeview Hotel and use it on one of the doors in the same corridor as room 312, and James will discover a dog who has apparently been controlling all the events of Silent Hill 2 from a rather large comical computer. This comes as a little light relief considering the overall dark tone of the game. And James gets his face licked. Bless him. The 6th and final ending is a continuation of the UFO ending from Silent Hill 1. Obtaining the blue gem and using it in 3 separate locations will summon a group of alien ships that will abduct James with the help of none other than Harry Mason, who is now on the side of the aliens. Many have theorised that the in-water ending is indeed the canon ending of the story, with Masahiro Ito and Guy Seehee, that's the actor who plays James Sunderland, choosing In Water as their own canon endings. Ito also stated, however, that it is down to player interpretation. The fact that James flat out refuses the notion that he would ever kill himself to Angela also strengthens the fact that In Water isn't canon. I, for one, would like to think that Rebirth actually happened and Zombie Mary is a thing. As a side note, the original PS2 release didn't have the UFO ending. Now that we are rounding out this video, let's crunch some quickfire numbers. Silent Hill 2 has an average critic review of 89% on Metacritic, with a noticeable 90% from game website titan IGN. The average user score on Metacritic comes in at a solid 9.2. People love Silent Hill 2 by the looks of it, which is great, because I love this game! In its first month of release, it sold over 1 million copies across North America, Japan and Europe during its original PS2 release. That's 1.28 million to be exact, with the OG Xbox version adding an additional 280,000 copies shortly after. When the HD collection release with Silent Hill 2 included, both across PS3 and Xbox 360, a further 510,000 copies would find their ways into people's systems, topping out total sales at just over 2 million. I'd say that's not bad considering the age of the game. At time of recording, Silent Hill 2 has been completed on PC by Punchy in an incredible 38 minutes and 31 seconds using a skip. That's bloody quick! The console record is on the OG Xbox by Airwick, coming in at 42 minutes and 43 seconds with no skipping at all. Links to both these runs, if you're interested, will be in the description. Right. That's it for the first episode of Deep Dives. If you've liked what you've watched today, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and also like this video. As it is my first deep dive, feedback is absolutely welcome. What have I done right? What have I done wrong? Did I miss anything? And is there anything you'd like to see me cover in future videos? Please feel free to leave comments and I will try to respond in a timely fashion. Also, please give me a follow on Twitter at DonPedroX for regular updates on upcoming videos. Right, see you next time.